Any one of us might find it hard to make that transition from the way we had been doing something to the way we're now instructed to do it. Maybe it's just that mentally we're finding it hard to grasp the sense behind the change. We're loyal, we're going to cooperate, but our brain keeps saying, why are we going in this direction? It seems to me we should be going in that direction instead. Shovel the coal.
Just shovel the coal?
On March 9, 2024, students from around the world were delighted to graduate from the 155th class of Gilead. The students came from 5 continents, represented more than 20 countries, and spoke over 35 languages. What parting encouragement did members of the governing body, the Gilead instructors, and others give to the graduates? What intriguing talk themes were developed? Which countries were featured in the latest edition of the Inside Story?
Man, with that intro, I bet you're more pumped than you were for Avengers Endgame. This is this month's JW Broadcasting episode, and since they're lazy idiots, they say, hey, we have this talk recorded that we gave to missionaries after an intensive cold course, so let's just make that this month's JW Broadcasting. Seriously, why are they condensing all of this stuff if it's not purely out of laziness? What are they doing with all of these extra time? Writing the annual Watchtower magazine they produce?
The graduation program today will benefit every listener, but even so, please know that this program has been prepared with your class in mind.
No, it will not benefit every listener. No Jehovah's Witness talk has ever benefited any listener, Kenneth, because they are all the same talk that Jehovah's Witnesses already know by heart. Seriously, he literally just goes on to say, hey, remember the example of David, without even reading any Bible verse, so he doesn't even have to add meaning on top of them. He just reminds Jehovah's Witnesses of the meaning they've already placed on top of them, and calls it a day. Not without reminding his listeners of the conditional love he pretends to have for them, of course.
So like David, he had the gratitude to remember Jehovah's help. So do we. David had the faith to trust in Jehovah's help, and so do we. And we see those good qualities in you, and we love you for it.
Love is conditional in this cult, and Kenneth just reminded everyone of it. You deserve love when and if you're helping indoctrinate others into the cult and obeying it like you. That's it. And this will turn out to be the start and masterclass on the only thing Jehovah's Witnesses are good at: manipulating other members into staying indoctrinated.
What do I need to do? Have you ever asked yourself that question? Well, if you're like me, you ask yourself that question every day, sometimes several times a day. What do I need to do next? But there's a little bit more to that question, and maybe you haven't asked yourself this in a while. What do I need to do to inherit everlasting life? And maybe that's a question you asked when you were first studying the Bible, and rightly so. Or maybe during your course of your Gilead training, you asked yourself that question a number of times.
This question is the secret basis of the religion, and this dude just almost accidentally said it out loud. Because the answer, according to this cult at least, is simple. Do whatever the governing body tells you to do. That is the answer to every problem. However, this speaker isn't here to manipulate his audience. He's here to teach his audience how to use this manipulation tactic on others.
Good lessons here for us. When we're talking with people about the Bible and our ministry, sometimes we may detect they have a little knowledge. Flip the question back to them. What do you think? Or better yet, what do you read? Another thing we can do is found in verse 28. Commend a person if they give a correct response. Let them know that you think everlasting life is within their reach.
Let them know that you think everlasting life is within their reach? Yes, because that's the easiest way to manipulate someone into doing something. You tell them that they will get a reward if they do what you say. And the class of manipulation keeps going when he teaches how Jehovah's Witnesses deal with questions.
When others have a question, never belittle the question, right? Simply help them to come to the right conclusion. We never want to criticize someone for a motive that may not be the best. just kindly respond. Maybe a parable, an illustration, will help them get the point.
Yes, we know that people ask questions because they have bad motivations. Wondering why the theology makes no sense can only happen if your actual motivation is to sin, as we all know. This is how Jehovah's Witnesses demonize questions. First, they remind them not to be mad about questions, like that is the natural reaction to questions, and instead use whatever tools they have at their disposal to manipulate the person with a question into reaching not the truth, but the right conclusion.
Have you ever learned from a Samaritan? I know I have. One day many years ago, I was driving down the road and I had a flat tire. And I had a spare tire, but the tools I didn't have. So this is before the days of cell phones. I walked up to the nearest house. I said, "Can I use your phone, please, to call a tow truck?" And the man said, "Well, why? I need to change my tire." He says, "I'll help you." He comes out of his house, gets his tools, and in no time changes my tire. As he's doing so, I'm thinking to myself, he's of another religion, he's of another culture, another racial background. He's changing my tire. As I'm driving away, I'm thinking, Jehovah taught me something today from a Samaritan.
This is an extremely telling little story. This Jehovah's Witness was surprised that someone from another religion and a different background was so willing to help out, because as a Jehovah's Witness, the absolutely only reason you have to help someone out is to give a good witness, aka to use that chance to try and indoctrinate someone into the cult. Jehovah's Witnesses do absolutely no charity work or donations and are unlikely to go out of their way to help someone the way they would a fellow cult follower, especially when they know that no indoctrination can happen. And it seems like little Johnny here was almost about to learn that same lesson, when instead, the lesson he gets is, Jehovah taught me how to be a good Samaritan to others for indoctrination purposes. If when you help someone, you have an ulterior motive for doing that, then you're not being a good Samaritan. You're just taking advantage of the situation.
Therefore, the advice is, savor the moment. As one famous quote says, yesterday's the past, tomorrow's the future, but today is a gift, and that is why they call it the present.
That is the only bit of that speech that I'll show you, because it's nothing but a boring speech about gaslighting yourself into thinking you're doing work for the cult that makes you happy. Because when you're a Jehovah's Witness, if you don't learn to get happiness from working for free for the cult, you will not have many other sources of happiness available to you. Instead, let's just skip forward to the next talk, given by someone who works writing propaganda for this cult, which is all about accepting changes from this cult with a smile on your face.
Well, you brothers and sisters from the 155th class of Gilead are not only about to graduate, but will soon be heading toward your assignments, which we know you'll enjoy. But life being what it is, you know, problems occasionally arise. And one problem you might personally encounter somewhere down the road is difficulty understanding an adjustment to an organizational or theocratic arrangement. Now, it could be a change in our preaching methods, or in congregation operations, or in branch procedures, or something like that. Now, normally we appreciate these organizational refinements in harmony with Isaiah 60:17, and yet our publications and even the Bible itself acknowledge that at some point any one of us might find it hard to make that transition from the way we had been doing something to the way we're now instructed to do it. Now, why would we find it difficult? Because it affects us personally? It changes where we serve or what we do? Maybe that. Maybe not that. Maybe it's just that mentally we're finding it hard to grasp the sense behind the change. We're loyal, we're going to cooperate, but our brain keeps saying, why are we going in this direction? It seems to me we should be going in that direction instead. Well, if we have been given new direction, and mentally we're strongly inclined otherwise, then we have a problem?
I screamed at my screen when I saw this the first time. It is insane to me, the things they're now willing to say out loud. This religion has gone from being the expert religion that had read the Bible so well it had deciphered the exact date of the end of the world, to being a cult about the idea of remaining in the cult. Edward just said out loud that there might be times when you know with your brain that something is wrong with the religion. And if that happens, you have a problem that you need to solve. This not only gaslights doubting followers into believing they are the ones who are wrong when they doubt the cult, it also insults people who leave for having doubts, placing the blame directly on them and their inability to solve their own problems. And the one example that he can come up with from the Bible is the transition from Jews into Christians. Jehovah's Witnesses believe in the barely biblical and completely ahistorical story that the Jews served Jehovah. And when Jesus came, most Jews, or at least the good ones, simply became Christians themselves. And obviously, if this had happened, then they would have had to change the ways they did things to do it more like the modern congregation of Jehovah's Witnesses. So they deduce that that transition must have been hard for some of those early Christians/Jews.
Prior to Christianity, the Mosaic Law was Jehovah's arrangement for worship, so there must have been some Jewish worshipers who, before becoming Christian, were very loyal to the Mosaic Law. And being of the loyal sort, what do you think they did? Just obey the law? No, they'd have taken it further. They'd have worked hard to cultivate a strong appreciation for the law, a deep love for the way different features of the law reflected Jehovah's personality, his ways, his thinking. Perhaps some invested years bringing their appreciation up to that high level, and now that they had, the law suddenly goes out of effect. Now, you can appreciate why it might have been hard for some loyal ones to process this change mentally. Could something like that happen today? Yes, it could.
But it didn't happen like that before. If you look up even just a little bit, you'll realize that all of those Bible verses that Christians pretend talk about a prophecy of the Messiah weren't written as a prophecy in the Old Testament. That interpretation was simply just put on top of those verses to justify its reform as a part of this religion called Christianity. When Paul talks about the importance of staying in the truth of Christ, that's Paul telling people to stay in his version of Christianity, because it was a brand new movement with multiple branches. Instead, Jehovah's Witnesses simply pretend that the Jews were all unified in their own faith, and then just got an update from the governing body of the time, telling them that they received new light and that things were going to change from that point on, exclusively so he can pretend this gigantic change going from the Old Testament to the New Testament is comparable to, well...
Maybe you're taught years ago, this is how we preach, and this is why. Yeah? Or this is how the congregation handles certain situations, and this is why. Or this is how we view certain branch procedures, and this is why it is the very best way. Now, being of the loyal sort, what did you do? You made it all your own. Not just the arrangement itself, but the reasoning behind the arrangement. If somebody came along and challenged it, you loyally defended it, and maybe it took you years to bring your appreciation up to that high level. But loyally, you did. And now that you did, the arrangement changes. And maybe even the reasoning behind the arrangement. Well, like some of those early Jewish Christians, your very loyalty to a previous theocratic arrangement might make it hard to grasp immediately the wisdom behind the new adjustment.
They are just giving the game away at this point, right? They're literally telling followers, yes, we know that we told you that this was the best way. We know that we told you why. And we know that you might have even believed that shit and defended it against people who told you we should do things differently. But If we decide we need to do things differently and give you all the reasons you yourself put down when you heard it from somebody else, you need to obey with a smile on your face. And remember, this is written to Gilead graduates who are supposed to not just believe this, but teach this to everyone. This really leaves me thinking of the state of the religion. Before, the religion had to make changes when things didn't pan out the way they predicted. And when people realized that the leaders didn't actually know anything about the Bible because of it, the leaders simply demonized the ones who left, saying that they had weak faith or were too proud. But the doctrine wasn't about that. The doctrine was about Bible interpretations. Now, the religion has gotten the doctrine so much and has been so unimaginative in coming up with new doctrine to replace it, that the doctrine has become about demonizing anyone who leaves. That's it. You're supposed to stay not because this religion teaches you the deep truths about the Bible, but because the ones who leave are proud, and you wouldn't want to be proud. But the manipulation class has just started.
Well, like we said, that's the problem. What's the solution? What can we actually do about it? Three things, and all three are right there in the verses we just read. First, be patient. Well, what did Paul say there in verse 15? Therefore, let those of us who are mature be of this mental attitude, and if you're mentally inclined otherwise, God will reveal the above attitude to you. So if you've made an earnest endeavor, a prayerful endeavor to get the sense behind a change, and for now you just can't, set it aside. Be patient, because the day will come, maybe sooner, but maybe later, when the pieces finally fall into place for you and you grasp the wisdom behind the adjustment.
This is the very first thing you need to do when you have doubts about the Jehovah's Witnesses. You may voice them once to the right people. Maybe send a letter to Bethel asking for clarification. But like in every other cult, you can only ask a question once. And if you're unsatisfied with the answer, that's only because you haven't spent enough time realizing just how amazing the answer is. The solution? Shut up and give it time. You know when a stalker kidnaps their victim and creepily tells them that they will learn to love him in time? This is pretty much the same logic. And Edward keeps twisting the meaning of Bible verses to make it almost the same point a second time.
Now, number two, walk orderly. What does that mean? The study note for verse 16 explains that walking orderly has to do with moving forward unitedly as Christians. So in the context of what we're talking about right now, walking orderly means support the new arrangement without resisting, without complaining. Because what does complaining and resisting do? It's walking disorderly. It's promoting disunity. So no, we walk orderly, we support the arrangement.
Yes, because since they told you that this Bible verse means obeying the governing body, if you voice out loud the issues you have, that would be against the meaning they decided this verse has. This is exactly how Jehovah's Witnesses twist scriptures. The term unity is extremely important for a cult, but unfortunately, it's almost nowhere to be found in the Bible. So if you have a Bible-based cult, you kind of have to jam it into some Bible verse, twisting it to pretend that that's the part of the Bible that talks about unity. I could explain the biblical background on this verse to show what Paul actually meant, but even a quick read of the book of Acts and Paul's letters would immediately show you that he was definitely not talking about obeying new light from the governing body. Plus, the manipulation class is still going.
Now, number three, stay busy in your theocratic routine, because there in verse 16, Paul encourages all of the Philippians to keep making progress. Now, the same is true of all of us. Certainly, there are many aspects of the truth that we do appreciate, we do understand, and we're making progress. Good. Put your mind and heart there, right? rather than continuing to obsess over something that you just can't understand for now. Stay busy on your assignment and stay absorbed in your weekly spiritual routine. It brings immediate contentment.
And that's the final way you're taught to deal with your doubts. When in doubt, spend more time indoctrinating yourself into thinking you're wrong, and spend more time working for free for the cult. In fact, double your contributions to the cult so you can sink deeper and deeper into it while profiting the religion. This 3-step process of blaming yourself for finding holes in the religion and combating it by doubling down on your self-indoctrination and cult efforts is how Jehovah's Witnesses are taught to deal with doubts, or pretty much with any negative feeling that they may have towards the religion. In psychology, this would be described as trying to solve your uncomfortable cognitive dissonance by developing a codependent relationship with the cult and using self-deception and repression to get into a state of learned helplessness, where you learn to feel unable to control or change things you know need changing simply because you know you are powerless. But Edward has one more illustration just to drive the point home.
Now, I would like to conclude by illustrating that last point, the value of staying busy in our theocratic routine. Because it is the solution, not just to what we're talking about right now, it is the solution to several situations in life. Now, the illustration is one that I heard several years ago at a Gilead graduation program. How about that? One of your instructors told us about the old steamboats that used coal for fuel, right? So upstairs you had the captain and the crew. Downstairs you have these men busy shoveling coal into the ship's boiler, right? Now imagine one of these workers puts his shovel down and he approaches a coworker and says, "Hey, did I just detect the ship starting to make a left turn? That does not seem right to me. Seems that at this point of the trip, we should be moving straight forward, not changing direction. I wonder if the captain really knows what he's doing. You know what? I'm going to go upstairs and have a word with the captain." Now, at this point, the speaker stopped describing the scene. He just leaned forward close to the microphone and he simply said, "Shovel the coal." Oh, that's you and me, right? That's you and me.
Just shovel the coal? This is how the governing body sees the average Jehovah's Witness, as nothing but coal shovers that could never have any good or actual insight down there, and should never ever check things upstairs with the captain, and should exclusively believe that the captain can only and exclusively always be right. That boat needs a coal pusher union. That's what it really needs.
And then, as Jehovah navigates his organization, he'll also navigate us to the right attitude, to contentment, and to that most wonderful adjustment of all, from this system to life in the new world.
And of course, he closes by telling you that getting used to changes this religion makes to try and stay relevant is just practice for when you experience the biggest change, paradise. Hinting that if you don't learn to just accept whatever the governing body says and be happy about it, then you cannot survive Armageddon. I don't think I've ever seen a talk where they literally explain the plot like this. And unfortunately, it's probably going to be an effective indoctrination session for any of the few Jehovah's Witnesses who are actually listening to this instead of tuning out and just pretending to listen while playing Tetris in their heads. Or, Candy Crush? What are kids playing these days? Whenever people begin to doubt, they are trained to see literally anything against their doubts as Jehovah directly telling them what to do, especially if it comes from the platform. I'm sure this familiar and yet effective technique of self-defeating and repressing your doubts will work in some who are beginning to have doubts. That's mainly why I make these videos, to provide an alternative viewpoint based on facts and logic, just in case you or someone you know heard this speech and found it encouraging. Once you fully wake up from the cult, you realize that what we thought were the most encouraging talks are actually the cultiest ones. But that's all for now. Hit that subscribe button if you don't want to miss the rest of these talks, or become a supporter like these guys right here if you want to see them as soon as I have them ready.